After Charlie Kirk's tragic death, best-selling author Stephen King took a shocking swipe at his legacy, trying to smear and defame him just days after the tragedy. But what King didn't expect was a defense from the most unlikely of sources. New York Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, a man who had built his career opposing everything Kirk stood for. What unfolded next left a divided nation stunned. The air across America was heavy, suffocating with grief. Just days ago, Charlie Kirk, husband, father, and one of the most influential conservative voices of his generation, had been gunned down while speaking to students at Utah Valley University. His wife, Erica, was still in shock, clinging to their children in disbelief. Candles flickered outside churches, memorials lined the streets, and people whispered prayers, their voices breaking. But even in this raw hour, something vile happened. Horror author Stephen King, beloved by millions, took to X with a shocking accusation. Without proof, without pause, he claimed Charlie had once advocated stoning gay people to death. The words spread like wildfire. Within hours, anger exploded. Charlie's family hadn't even buried him, and yet his name was being smeared in front of the world. The timing cut deeper than any wound. The nation didn't just feel sadness anymore. It felt betrayal. The healing wound had been ripped wide open. Stephen King deleted the post after fierce backlash, but the damage had already been done. Millions had seen it, screenshotted it, shared it. The apology that followed felt hollow. Conservatives erupted. Utah Senator Mike Lee demanded a defamation lawsuit. Representative Anna Paulina Luna thundered that King should donate $10 million to Charlie's grieving family. A bookstore in Belfast, Northern Ireland, announced it was pulling every Stephen King title from its shelves. "We thought so much more of you," their statement read. "We cannot condone such an abhorrent and ill-informed remark." Across America, the debate raged, but the fact-checkers had already spoken. The claim was false. In living rooms from Utah to Ohio, families stared at their phones, hearts breaking all over again. Charlie's widow, sitting quietly with her children, whispered to a friend, "It feels like they are killing him twice." The air was thick with anger, but then came a voice no one, absolutely no one, expected. The storm grew louder with every hour. But then Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist assemblyman from Queens, broke his silence. He wasn't speaking as a politician seeking advantage. He wasn't speaking to his base. He was speaking as a man who, despite his profound disagreements with Kirk, felt a line had been crossed. On X, he addressed King directly. "Dear Stephen King, I have spent my entire political life fighting against the ideology Charlie Kirk championed. We agreed on virtually nothing. But on September 10th, 2025, Charlie Kirk, a husband and a father, was murdered. In the very hour his wife was in shock and his children had just lost their dad, you posted a despicable lie to smear him. Fact-checkers proved it false. You deleted it. You apologized. But apologies are weightless when the damage is carved into stone." His words cut through the noise like lightning. For millions watching, this wasn't politics. This was a stunning, unfiltered act of principle. Mamdani continued, "Your words, amplified by your platform, poured gasoline on a fire of hatred. It is the very thing you claim to oppose. This is not progressive, it is cruel." America fell silent. The post from Zohran Mamdani spread across the internet like a shockwave. People stopped scrolling and read every word, bewildered. Cable networks interrupted programming. The chyron at the bottom of the screen blared, "Socialist lawmaker Zohran Mamdani condemns Stephen King's post on Charlie Kirk." What stunned America most wasn't Mamdani's authority, but his profound, unexpected decency. He didn't sound like a politician. He sounded like a man of principle who could not stay silent in the face of a grotesque injustice, even when the victim was his staunchest opponent. Social media lit up. The hashtag #JusticeForCharlie was suddenly joined by a new, confused, and rapidly climbing hashtag, #Mamdani. For the first time since the assassination, a different kind of hope broke through the grief, the hope that humanity could still transcend politics. But the storm was far from over. By evening, the controversy reached live television. CNN announced a special segment with Stephen King's spokesperson. But to everyone's shock, Zohran Mamdani himself agreed to appear live. The nation tuned in, utterly captivated. The anchor asked the opening question, but Mamdani didn't wait. His voice was steady, not with anger, but with a firm, unshakable conviction. Stephen King didn't just make a mistake, he said, staring directly into the camera. He committed an act of profound cruelty against a grieving family. I oppose Charlie Kirk at every turn. But to smear a man, any man, while his family is weeping is not an error. It's a moral failure. The studio fell silent. Even the anchor leaned back, stunned. Mamdani continued, his tone cutting. Words don't vanish because you delete them. 30 million people saw that lie. Many will believe it forever. And Stephen, you know that. Watching from his home, Stephen King looked shaken. The backlash he expected from the right was one thing. That a moral indictment from the far left was something else entirely. Mamdani leaned in, his voice rising with controlled intensity. Stephen, you've spent years positioning yourself as a moral voice against what you see as conservative cruelty. But in this darkest of hours, you became the very thing you condemn. You claim to regret it, but regret without action is hollow. The anchor tried to cut in, but Mamdani pressed on. If you mean what you say, prove it. Start a fund for Charlie Kirk's family. Seed it with $1 million of your own dollars. Rally your fans to join. Use your platform for healing instead of hate. Show the world that your principles aren't just reserved for your political allies. Gasps rippled through the studio. This wasn't a political maneuver. It was a dare, a challenge rooted in pure ethics. Mamdani's words cut deeper still. Your apology is nothing compared to the tears Erica Kirk cried as she held her children. If you believe in decency, then show it. If not, then every word you've ever written about good versus evil is as empty as that deleted post. The audience watching at home sat frozen. People clutched their chests. On both sides of the political aisle, they wept. The tables had turned, and Stephen King was left speechless. The air in the studio was tense, almost suffocating. Producers in the control room whispered frantically, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the assemblyman continue. But the anchor, visibly shaken, gave a small nod to keep the cameras rolling. Zohran Mamdani didn't flinch. His voice carried an unassailable weight, not the polished tone of a politician, but the steady, resonant voice of a man defending a principle he held sacred. Charlie Kirk and I would never have been friends, he stated plainly, a fact everyone knew. But he was a man who loved his wife, he adored his children, and on the day he was murdered, Stephen King chose to tarnish that basic human truth with a lie. Across America, families sat in utter silence. Erica Kirk, watching from home with her children huddled against her, felt tears streaming down her face. For the first time since Charlie's death, she didn't feel alone in her grief. She felt defended from an impossible corner. Someone who had fought her husband on every issue was now standing up for his humanity. The studio was quiet enough to hear the hum of the lights. Pundits on the left and right, who had spent years criticizing Mamdani, found themselves unable to dismiss the raw integrity pouring from his words. It was no longer an interview, it was a national reckoning. Within minutes, clips of Mamdani's rebuke flooded social media. Millions replayed his words with captions that read, "This is what integrity looks like." And Zohran Mamdani just showed us what decency means. Even those who despised his politics felt pulled into the moment. Elon Musk posted the clip with a simple caption. "This is courage." It racked up millions of views within minutes. Backlash against King deepened. Angry fans posted videos throwing his novels in trash bins. But Mamdani wasn't celebrating. Backstage, his staff noticed his hands trembling as he checked his phone, which was exploding with messages of both praise and fury. "This isn't about politics," he told them quietly. "It's about what's right. If we don't defend the humanity of our opponents, then what do our own principles even mean?" When the anchor finally gave Stephen King's spokesperson a chance to respond, the audience leaned forward. But nothing could match the moral force of what had just been said. Zohran Mamdani struck again. "Stephen, you don't need another apology. You need to show repentance. You need to actively undo the harm you've caused. Until then, your words are a poison to the very decency you claim to champion." Gasps filled the studio. The spokesperson stuttered, but every sentence fell flat. Viewers across the country wept. In a VFW hall in Ohio, a veteran who had voted against everything Mamdani stood for shook his head in disbelief and said to the man next to him, "I'll be damned, the socialist is right." Online, a single phrase began trending worldwide. # Charlie deserved better. By the end of the segment, it was clear the smear had backfired. Stephen King was on the defensive, and Zohran Mamdani, standing not as a friend or an ally, but as a political adversary armed only with principle, had become the voice of America's conscience. For a rare moment, America paused, its deep political lines blurred. Even those who had despised Charlie Kirk in life admitted that the smear so soon after his death was inhumane. Commentators on rival networks found themselves unable to spin it. "This isn't about left versus right anymore," one analyst confessed. "This is about human decency." At that same moment, Erica Kirk received hundreds of texts from strangers. "We disagree with your husband, but we stand with you on. Your husband's legacy won't be tarnished by this lie. We respect what Zohran Mamdani did tonight." America wasn't just hearing a message, it was feeling a profound shift. By nightfall, every clip of Mamdani's rebuke was circulating at lightning speed. A mother in Utah, a conservative, recorded herself sobbing after watching the clip. "My son was there when Charlie was shot," she said. "To see this lie, and then to see that man, of all people, stand up for him. Thank you, Mr. Mamdani." Her video went viral. Inside his home, Stephen King stared at his phone, watching decades of goodwill evaporate. Meanwhile, Zohran Mamdani prepared to go back on camera. His aides urged caution, warning him of the backlash from his own base. He shook his head. "The truth is all I have," he said firmly. And America waited, breathless, for what he would say next. Zohran Mamdani stepped back into the studio lights. He looked straight into the camera, his eyes heavy not with personal grief, but with the weight of the moment. "I am not here tonight as an ally of Charlie Kirk," he began, his voice clear and resonant. "I am here because the ground on which we stand as a decent society is eroding, and we must defend it." The silence was deafening. Every person watching could feel the gravity of his words. Mamdani went on. "Charlie Kirk believed in the power of his ideas. I believe in the power of mine. We were opponents, but to see a man's memory attacked with lies in his family's darkest hour, that is an attack on our shared humanity." People watching at home began weeping openly. A truck driver pulled over on the side of the road, wiping his eyes, completely bewildered by what he was witnessing. In a hospital waiting room, patients and nurses paused to watch. Mamdani pressed his hand against the table, his voice trembling with conviction. "Stephen, you didn't just smear a public figure you disliked. You smeared a husband and a father in front of his grieving children, and America saw it." The moment felt less like politics and more like a eulogy for decency itself, broadcast to a divided nation. When the anchor turned to Stephen King's spokesperson for a rebuttal, the words sounded rehearsed and hollow. "Mr. King has apologized," the spokesperson began, but the audience groaned. Mamdani leaned forward, shaking his head. "A mistake? You don't mistakenly accuse a murdered man of something so vile. That isn't a typo. That is intentional cruelty dressed up as commentary." Clips of the exchange spread instantly. One showed Mamdani's steady, piercing gaze as the spokesperson fumbled. The caption read, "This is what happens when principle meets lies." The spokesperson fell silent, unable to match the raw conviction of the assemblyman. And for the first time in decades, Stephen King, the giant of horror literature, looked small. By now, America was split wide open, but not along the usual political lines. This wasn't left versus right. This was truth versus lies, decency versus cruelty. In Arizona, Erica Kirk sat with her children. She whispered to her little ones, "See, that man? He fought with Daddy about everything, but he knows what's right. He's protecting Daddy's name." Tears streaked her face, but for the first time since the tragedy, a flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. Commentators admitted they had never seen a politician risk so much with their own base to defend the honor of a rival. Across the country, ordinary Americans felt united, not by politics, but by a shared yearning for that kind of integrity. The clash dominated every screen in America. News stations replayed the exchange on loop as social media boiled over. At a candlelight vigil in Utah, mourners held their phones in the air, watching Mamdani's words. Some sobbed quietly. A young conservative man turned to his friend and said, "I've spent 5 years hating that guy. Tonight he spoke for all of us." In Washington, reporters pressed progressive leaders for comment, leaving them stammering. Meanwhile, Stephen King remained silent, his apologies drowned out by Mamdani's moral fire. Back in the studio, Mamdani pressed on. "This isn't about the left or the right," he said firmly. "This is about the line between humanity and cruelty." And Stephen King crossed that line. The anchor sat stunned. At home, families leaned closer to their screens. In truck stops, strangers who would normally argue about politics nodded at each other in solemn agreement. Clips flooded TikTok and Instagram. Teenagers, many of whom had never followed Kirk or Mamdani, posted emotional videos, marveling at an act of such raw, unexpected honesty from a politician. In a country often fractured, Zohran Mamdani had cut through the noise with something deeper than politics, truth spoken from the heart. As the segment drew on, he delivered the blow that sealed the moment. Looking directly into the camera, he said, "Stephen King, you didn't just offend a political party. You didn't just smear a man. You stabbed at the heart of a grieving family and a grieving nation. And for that, history will not remember your apology. It will remember your cruelty." The studio fell into absolute silence. At that very moment, millions of Americans broke down in tears. A tweet that went viral read, "Zohran Mamdani didn't just defend Charlie Kirk. He defended the idea that we can still be decent to each other." Mamdani's voice softened again, trembling as he spoke. "When I heard Charlie Kirk had been shot, my first thought was of his family. And then, while his blood was still warm, Stephen King decided to turn his death into a political punchline. That is evil." The camera zoomed closer. His eyes glistened. "I'm not standing here as a politician. I'm just a man who believes we have to be better than this. I can only imagine what his wife is going through. The last thing she needed was a lie spread to millions." America leaned in, every word echoing. Backstage, aides saw Mamdani's hands shake as he gripped the table. But he didn't waver. He had transformed a moment of political ugliness into a powerful call for moral strength, and the country could feel it. The moment was no longer a debate. It was a confession of national pain broadcast live to the world. In Arizona, Erica Kirk sat with her children on the couch. The youngest clutched a teddy bear, too young to understand, but sensing the heaviness in the room. The older one, barely holding back tears, whispered, "Mommy, why would someone say lies about Daddy?" Erica's heart shattered. She hugged her kids tightly, whispering, "Daddy stood for what he believed was true. And tonight, a man who disagreed with him on everything is fighting for his honor because it's the right thing to do." As she wiped her tears, her phone buzzed nonstop, but it was Mamdani's words on the TV that gave her a strange new strength. "See this man?" she whispered to her children, pointing at Zohran Mamdani. "He and Daddy were not friends. They fought about ideas, but he is protecting Daddy's name because he believes in truth. That is a very rare and brave thing." Across the country, countless parents echoed her words, using the broadcast as a lesson not about friendship, but about integrity, moral courage, and our shared humanity. By defending Charlie, Zohran Mamdani wasn't just protecting a legacy, he was teaching a generation what principle truly looked like. As the program ended, the floodgates opened. Social media erupted with raw emotion. A trending post read, "Tonight wasn't politics. Tonight was humanity." Another said, "Stephen King lost the crowd. Zohran Mamdani may have just saved a piece of our nation's soul." Belfast Books posted again, this time quoting Mamdani directly. But through all the noise, one clip rose above. Zohran Mamdani, his voice filled with conviction, saying, "Charlie deserved better. His family deserved better. America deserves better." That line was shared millions of times within an hour. People weren't just agreeing, they were crying, mourning, and for the first time in a long time, uniting across an impossible divide. As the nation went to bed that night, one truth was clear. Zohran Mamdani, had taken a moment of profound grief and turned it into a national plea for decency. The next morning, America awoke in a state of shock. News channels, left, right, and center, played the clash again and again. Hosts known for attacking Mamdani's socialist policies couldn't ignore the sheer power of his moral stand. In a coffee shop in Ohio, a group of strangers gathered around a laptop. One elderly woman wiped tears from her eyes. "That's the first time I've heard a politician sound like a moral leader in years," she said. In schools, teachers played parts of the exchange during civics lessons, telling students, "This is what moral courage looks like in real life." For the first time, Stephen King's global reputation felt truly shaken. But Zohran Mamdani didn't focus on the headlines. Privately, he sat alone in his small office, looking out the window, the weight of his actions settling upon him. He had alienated parts of his base and stunned his opposition into silence. He whispered to the empty room, "There was no other choice." On live morning shows, Stephen King's defenders tried to push back, but America wasn't buying it. Mamdani's words from the night before kept echoing. Apologies are weightless when the damage is carved into stone. The cultural tide was turning, and fast. Charlie Kirk issued a short statement. "We are broken, but we are profoundly thankful for the unexpected voices standing up for Charlie's truth." Those words only fueled the emotional firestorm. Mamdani's defense wasn't political, it was a matter of principle, and America knew it. That evening, Zohran Mamdani appeared once more, this time at a national town hall. He stood behind the podium, his tone raw and heartfelt. "I wish I could say Charlie Kirk and I were friends," he began softly. "But we weren't. What I can do is defend the principle that our shared humanity must come before our political hatreds, because that's what being an American should mean." The crowd, a mix of faces from every political persuasion, erupted in applause, many standing with tears streaming down their faces. He continued, "Words have consequences. Lies kill trust. They kill unity. Tonight, I want us to choose differently. I want us to stand for truth, even when, and especially when, it's for someone we disagree with." Viewers at home wept. An elderly veteran in a wheelchair, who had spent his life voting Republican, watched from his living room. As Mamdani spoke, the veteran slowly raised his hand and saluted his television screen. He whispered, "I fought against everything that man stands for. But tonight he's fighting for the honor of this country. He has my respect." As candles flickered across America, one truth echoed. Zohran Mamdani's words had pierced the nation's soul. The town hall replayed again and again, but one line rose above them all. Mamdani had looked directly into the camera, his voice breaking, and said, "Charlie deserved better. His family deserved better. America deserves better." That sentence was everywhere. Commentators admitted they had never seen a politician risk so much for a principle that offered no political reward. It wasn't politics, one analyst had said. It was truth, and America knows the difference. In her living room, Charlie Kirk replayed the clip with her children. Her daughter, still clutching her teddy bear, whispered, "Mommy, he's protecting Daddy." Erica hugged her tighter, whispering back, "Yes, baby, he is." Erica hugged her tighter, whispering back, "Yes, baby, he is." Across the country, millions wiped tears from their eyes. For once, America wasn't divided. It was united by a shared moment of shocking clarity and a yearning for truth. As the hours passed, pressure mounted on Stephen King. His silence only made the anger louder. But Zohran Mamdani didn't gloat. He remained steady, reminding people, this is not about political victory or revenge. This is about reaffirming our shared decency. Those words calmed a storm that could have spiraled into chaos. Ordinary people continued sharing their stories. Fathers promising to teach their sons about integrity. Mothers telling daughters about the courage to stand up for someone you disagree with. It was no longer just about Charlie Kirk or Stephen King. It was about what kind of nation America wanted to be. And though Stephen King's silence was deafening, Zohran Mamdani's voice filled that void with conviction and a passionate plea for our better angels. By the following morning, the ripple effects were undeniable. Streets across America saw homemade posters taped to light poles with Charlie Kirk's face, and beneath it, Zohran Mamdani's words, "America deserves better." In coffee shops, strangers who would have argued a day before now comforted each other. In churches, pastors replayed Mamdani's town hall speech. Stephen King's name trended worldwide as a symbol of cruelty. But America wasn't rallying around anger. It was rallying around a principle. For the first time in years, conservatives, liberals, and socialists stood shoulder to shoulder, united by a hunger for dignity. Charlie Kirk's memory had become a national torch, and Zohran Mamdani was its most unlikely keeper. That evening, Zohran Mamdani gave one last address. Cameras flashed as he stepped onto the stage in a simple shirt and jacket. He looked into the camera and said, "I am not speaking today as a politician, and I am certainly not speaking as Charlie Kirk's friend. I am speaking as an American who believes we are losing our way. When you lie about the dead, you aren't just attacking a person. You're attacking their family, their children, and the very idea of truth." The audience was silent, many wiping tears. He leaned closer to the microphone. "To Stephen King, you cannot undo what you have done, but you can still choose to do something right. Donate to Charlie Kirk's family. Start the fund. Show us you mean it. America is watching." The challenge was unmistakable. In that moment, Mamdani didn't just defend Charlie's honor. He defended every person who had ever been dehumanized for their beliefs. The broadcast ended, but the impact didn't. Across the nation, people stood outside with candles, holding vigils for Charlie Kirk. They repeated Mamdani's words, their voices trembling with emotion. For Erica Kirk and her children, the pain was still unbearable, but they no longer felt alone. The night ended quietly for Zohran Mamdani. He sat in his office, eyes red with exhaustion, staring out at the city lights. He whispered to the darkness, "It had to be done." Stephen King's silence grew louder, but by then, it didn't matter. The tables had turned. America had chosen its side. Principle over politics, truth over tribe, humanity over hatred. And at the center of it all stood Zohran Mamdani, not as a politician, but as the man who defended his fallen adversary, and in doing so, reminded a nation of its conscience. Friends, if this story moved you, don't just watch, be part of it. Hit the like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss stories that tell the truth with courage and heart. And for those who want to stand even closer with us, join our membership today. Together, let's keep the light of integrity, truth, and moral courage burning.